This is a Commitment 2022 special in partnership with the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, the Granite State Debates.
Heat and housing, education and abortion, bail reform and gun laws. Issues on the table for New Hampshire's next governor, who will also grapple with the effects of national inflation and worker shortages. Incumbent Republican Chris Sununu is running for a fourth term. The former CEO of Waterville Valley and executive counselor says his leadership has given the Granite State a firm foundation to navigate these concerns.
We have the strongest economy in the country. That's not by accident. The best schools in the country, #1 in public safety and personal freedoms. We aren't just ranked pretty good, we're ranked the best.
But Democratic challenger Dr. Tom Sherman disagrees. The longtime physician and state senator from Rye says New Hampshire's new abortion law restricts personal freedom and that the everyday costs that have risen during Sununu's time in office are more than Granite Staters can afford.
My focus is completely on them. It's not politics. For me, it's people. It's about the people of New Hampshire. For him, it's politics first.
Which candidate has the right approach for New Hampshire? Voters will give their answer in just 1 week.
Tonight, the candidates for governor.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the Granite State Debates. I'm WMUR Political Director Adam Sexton. This is the first of 4 debates this week leading up to Tuesday's election. Tonight, we're joined by the candidates for governor. They will be answering questions from me and our panelists. Those panelists tonight are WMUR anchors Gene Mackin and Steve Botari. Here's a look at our format. Each candidate will get up to 60 seconds to answer a question. They'll get up to 30 seconds for a rebuttal if necessary, and that will be at my discretion. Candidates will also be given 60 seconds at the end of the hour for closing statements. Now, Granite Staters are feeling the pressure and pain of economic issues right now, from skyrocketing grocery bills to the cost of filling up with gas to keeping the lights on and staying warm. We want to address many of these economic concerns tonight. Let's start with heating costs, and Steve Botari has that question.
Adam, thank you. Right now, the price of a gallon of residential heating oil is $5.68. That's 82% more expensive than it was this time last year. Natural gas prices are also up. As we enter what will be the coldest months of the year, what specifically needs to change that you as governor would have power over to make sure Granite Staters don't have to worry about heating their homes? Dr. Sherman, to you first.
Thank you for the question. It's clear that we could have been in a much better place than we are right now had Governor Sununu actually encouraged what we need in terms of renewables, in terms of efficiencies, in terms of weatherization. Unfortunately, he did not. And not only are we facing issues of doubling of our energy prices, but the CEO of Eversource actually has come out in the last week and said we may not have enough supplies nationally or regionally to heat our homes, to actually provide the energy that we need. Had we done this 4 years ago, we could have been ahead of the game. He's calling for us to have more renewables. We could have had those renewables much further down the road than right now. That delay is costing Granite Staters. They're paying the price for Governor Sununu's vetoes and for his blocking that intervention.
Governor Sununu, what specifically that you would have power over as governor needs to change to make sure Granite Staters don't have to worry about heating their homes?
Look, let's understand, this hurts. It really hurts. Everyone's feeling it. Oil prices, it started with gas prices about 18 months ago. Then it came to fuel oil prices, the cost of your groceries at the store. Inflation is real. Bad policies out of Washington have real consequence on individuals, and it's hurting everyone. And even as Tom just said, it's a regional, national issue. You're seeing these price spikes everywhere. Electricity is now even higher in Massachusetts than it is here. You have to make the transition to renewables. We signed the net metering bill. We promote solar, on low-income families' apartment buildings or on folks with fixed incomes so that they get the benefit, first at the trough for the economic benefit, while we all get the environmental benefit. We're promoting offshore wind. I'm a big believer in hydro. It was the Democrats that killed Northern Pass. That was 1,200 megawatts of the cheapest renewable hydropower in the country. But at the end of the day, you need a transition. We need natural gas. We need those fossil fuels while we make that transition over the next 10 or 20 years. All or nothing doesn't work. And unfortunately, the whole country's feeling the pain.
Next question from Gene Mackin.
Let's talk more about the cost of electricity. It has also spiked in New Hampshire in the past 3 months. Between Eversource, New Hampshire Electric Co-op, and Liberty Utilities, the energy service rate has gone up between 77 and 112%. Unitil's increase kicks in December. What will you do right now to help Granite Staters handle the highest electric rates in state history? Governor, let's begin with you.
Well, I'll tell you what we did. In September, we brought the legislature back and we put forward a plan for, my plan was for $100 million of additional assistance. Why can we do that? Because we're very smart financially. We have good financial management at the top of the level. So we have this record state surplus. It's not our money, it's your money. Right? And so finding ways to get it back to taxpayers when they need it the most, that was the opportunity that we took advantage of, and the legislature passed that, expanding the ability for what we call LIHEAP, those that are looking for additional assistance for electricity, expanding it for heating oil, expanding it for those that need it the most. And even some families that traditionally wouldn't qualify for those programs now can qualify for those programs. And I really encourage everyone to go to your regional CAP agencies and see if you qualify. There's a lot of money out there waiting to be had. So with having good financial management, prioritizing your spending, building up the record surplus, we're allowed to reinvest those dollars right back into families.
And Dr. Sherman, what would you do to help Granite Staters handle these electric rates?
I did vote for that bill that came before us on veto day. I also proposed an amendment that would have allowed weatherization before we even got to the winter, and that was blocked in the Senate. The bottom line is we wouldn't have had to be here had the governor been more proactive 4 years ago. He talks about offshore wind. He talks about hydro. We already have hydro. We have solar, and we have wind that could have been much more strongly supported, and these rate increases would not have been as high as they are now. We also could have had, the governor's PUC could have allowed those rate increases to go in more slowly like Pennsylvania did, and it wouldn't have clobbered New Hampshire residents. I know people across the state right now, I've met them, who can't afford to heat their homes this winter even after we pass that. That's not necessary. It could have been prevented.
Governor, you were invoked. You get 30 seconds.
Well, again, look, the PUC is they're judges, right? We nominate them, they move forward as judges. You can't, as governor, interfere with that. That's actually illegal. So they have a process that lives independently. And if the PUC doesn't approve those rates, unfortunately, it means the power companies don't have the money to buy the power. Now you're looking at brownouts. I mean, we think it's bad now. Let me tell you something. It's going to get worse, unfortunately. It's going to get worse this winter. It's going to get worse this summer, not just for New Englanders, but all across the nation. Because when the demand goes up for natural gas, there's no incentive to produce it in other parts of the country. That is a direct reflection of bad policies out of D.C. that have to be changed.
You mentioned the PUC, Governor. Your nominees to the Public Utilities Commission caused an uproar when they moved to gut energy efficiency programs. Some critics have accused those commissioners of being more concerned with the welfare of big power companies than people struggling to pay their bills. Does the state need change at the PUC?
Well, when they made that decision, I wrote a letter right away saying they had to find a way to reverse it. And they did. I think the legislature came back, and I think Tom was supportive of that bill that came back and fixed that process. Again, I can't control their process, but when they do something that is going to have a drastic negative impact, it was too much, too fast, we take action. We don't sit back and avoid the issue. We don't talk about where it was. I'm an engineer. I love the challenges of redesigning a system, finding a better way to do it. And the only way to do that is when you acknowledge something didn't work. And I went right after the PUC, I think pretty much everybody did, and said that's got to be fixed. It was too much, too fast, and we made the corrections there. So there's always a better way to do it. There's always a way to respond. You have to follow the legislative process and whatnot, but the opportunity to redesign some of these systems, to think outside the box, to do things different than other states, that's what New Hampshire's known for. I think that's what we do really, really well.
Dr. Sherman, does the PUC need a change?
Absolutely, and the governor is rewriting history here. It was actually his pressure and Chairman Bose's pressure that prompted them to pull back on the efficiencies. He actually put in place that PUC. These are his appointees. These are his people. So not only did they take away so much of the energy efficiency and delayed it by a year, they also are the ones who are hitting the residents of New Hampshire with these abrupt doubling of prices right now. Both of those could have been avoided.
Next question from Steve Botari.
The U.S. Department of Energy describes advanced small modular reactors, and I'm going to quote them here, as a key part of the department's goal to develop safe, clean, and affordable nuclear power options. Would you support the development and eventual construction of one of these types of reactors here in New Hampshire? Dr. Sherman, to you first.
I've worked closely with Seabrook to make sure it's safe and that it's operating safely. I've worked with C10, which is the monitoring group around it. These are all things that we have done to make sure the people of New Hampshire are protected. I think nuclear energy has to be a part of our renewable portfolio. The concern I have ongoing is how do we deal with spent fuel? That's something that has not been fully addressed, but I would be open to exploring the possibility of those micro-reactors coming to New Hampshire.
And Governor Sununu?
Yeah, small batch nuclear reactors, that is the way of the future. It's not 5 and 10 years away. It's probably more like 50 years away, but a lot of those technologies are, they're safer, they have different containment systems, they're built into what we call microgrids, so it's not just one giant system on a grid where you pay $30 billion. You see the kind of the mess that's going on in Georgia with their newest mega reactor down there, but these smaller reactors that are safer, more modular, better to control, I think that's really where this country is going to be going. That's probably 50 years, 60 years away down the road. So probably nothing that can really impact, over what we can do over the next couple of years. Seabrook is a great nuclear power plant, by the way, has one of the best safety rating systems. We had the issue this summer. We got right on it. We worked with them. Hats off to the folks at the Department of Safety and Emergency Management when there was that false alarm. They got right on it and made sure that Seabrook was held accountable to that. But overall, they have a great safety record, and that's really where the future, I think, of not just renewable, but that transition off of fossil fuels is going to be.
Next question, Jean Mackin.
All right, thanks, Adam. Governor, during the COVID pandemic, the state took more than $1 billion from the federal government and appropriated it for economic recovery. You spoke out against the American Rescue Plan, but then accepted the money and spent it. How do you believe you are not responsible for some measure of inflation, since economists blame some of it on federal spending?
Look, there's no doubt when the federal government puts $5 trillion into the economy, that's going to drive inflation. I had very firm words for Secretary Janet Yellen when she said it was just temporary. Everybody knew it wasn't temporary. Or they said the recession isn't going to happen. Unfortunately, a recession is going to happen because there has to be a fallout from all of this. At the end of the day, when the state receives money, those are our dollars. Those are the taxpayers' dollars of New Hampshire. And if they're going to hand it out, when you hand money back to the federal government, they don't put it in the savings account. They just send it to New York or California. I'm not going to let that happen, of course. And given the team that we've put together in New Hampshire, we spend that one-time money smarter than anybody else in the country. It's one-time money for one-time spend, for capital projects to reduce our overall debt load, to take care of some infrastructure projects that haven't been done. But let's look at the transportation bill. Most of all that additional money just went to offset the costs of inflation. So they created the inflation problem, gave us the money, and we're building pretty much the same roads as we had before because they cost so much more. So, it's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy of inflation. They didn't really think it out very well. But here in New Hampshire, we spend those dollars smart.
So the question goes to you, Dr. Sherman. The state still hasn't spent all the COVID funding allocated to it by the federal government. So knowing what we know now about inflation, should the state still appropriate that, or at this point leave it unspent?
Well, first of all, the governor is stretching the truth on his ability to manage these funds. We just had to return almost $19 million of unspent money on emergency rental assistance right in the middle of a housing crisis. We have 700 families sitting in motels around the state waiting for that, and now having failed to spend that $19 million, the remainder is also at risk. And we have no plan for it. So perhaps we'll have to use that extra funding to take care of those people who are now in dire need because the governor didn't appropriately spend the money. It's like biting the hand that feeds you when he actually says to New Hampshire residents, that's your tax dollars, but we're not going to accept them because it's going to drive up inflation. That's not realistic because we need to have the assistance here in New Hampshire to help people, whether they're in need from rental assistance, whether it's addiction, whether it's mental health. All of these are issues that are failing under the current governor, and we need to have that allocation available.
Yeah, look, we've spent $230 million in that rental assistance program. We got a letter last week, I think it was in the news right here on WMUR. They said, from the Treasury, they said, by the way, we know you've asked for more money, which we did, but we're cutting the program off over Christmas. Christmas break, we're going to stop the program. I was appalled. And we immediately responded to the Department of Treasury. And our Democrat congressional delegation joined me the very next day in a similar letter to the Department of Treasury saying, you can't do that. You can't just cut our program off like that. The result wasn't much. I think they gave us like 4 more days of rental assistance. But they asked us if we wanted more money. We said yes. They cut us off over Christmas. It's been a disaster in Washington. So look, we've been able to provide opportunity with those dollars coming in, to be sure. But at the end of the day, it's that one-time money. It's not going to be there for the long term.
That's time. All right, Sherman, a response?
Yeah, again, the governor is rewriting history. He did not spend that $19 million, so it had to be returned. He returned $800,000 in assistance for hungry children. He just let lapse another Medicaid to free and reduced lunch that would have provided assistance to 7,000 children. This is all on the backs of New Hampshire residents. They're going to have to make up the difference because the governor was not able to manage his own programs, and he has to send back all of this federal assistance.
Governor, we'll give you a quick response, but we want to stay on housing.
Yeah, no, I don't even need to.
Okay.
It's pointless.
Next question from Steve Botari.
Keep on this topic of housing, Adam. Thank you. The Census Bureau considers a rental vacancy rate of 5% to be balanced. New Hampshire's vacancy rate, 0.5%. New Hampshire Housing says finding an apartment right now requires, in their words, persistence, luck, and networking. Never mind the burden of actually being able to pay for the rising rental costs. So, Dr. Sherman, what ideas do you have to immediately help Granite Staters who want to find and pay for a rental home or who want to move here to take a job?
Several things. First of all, we actually have a plan on our website, Building New Hampshire Values. It's a $35 million a year plan. It builds on the governor's $100 million plan, which fell incredibly short, only providing services for about 2,000 out of the 20,000 needed units. So we look at, or I look at things as we have to think about moving forward, strategic plan, so that we actually fully address the problem. We don't put a Band-Aid on it. When you look at the governor's plan right now, it's $150 million worth of applications. He's only able to fund $50 million of it. And the rest, what happens to it? There's no backup plan. There's no ongoing strategy. And this is classic for the governor because he just keeps putting Band-Aids on these issues that really need a thorough, full accounting, a thorough, full plan so that they can be addressed.
All right, so Governor, you have pointed to Invest NH as the answer, which is federal money that's being used to help build more multifamily housing. But the first units won't be ready for at least a year and a half, almost at the end of the next governor's term. So what will you do right now to help people find a place to live and afford that home?
Well, look, let's talk about Invest NH. $100 million plan. No governor in history ever proposed anything like that. We're getting it done. So Tom has a plan written on the website somewhere. Tomorrow at the Executive Council, the contracts come up and we're moving forward with the first $50 million. Then there's another $50 million that goes to cities and towns to incentivize a second round of projects. Plus we have a surplus fund and hopefully the legislature will come back and do that. So we're trying something that has never been done before and it's going amazingly well. We had this idea back in the spring. Checks are going out literally in the next couple of weeks, shovels in the ground. These are shovel-ready projects. And it's going to be incredibly successful. And these dollars offset the inflation that otherwise would have stalled these projects because the costs are too high. So what we're doing is absolutely transformational. Tom's absolutely right. We have 20,000 units we need to put on the market. Why? Because we are the envy of the nation. Everybody is moving here. Business is expanding here. We're the fastest state in population growth. Those are actually really good things. It creates a competitive market. I totally get it. But those are really good things for the state when everyone's moving in, driving the economic opportunity on wages. And so that's all a very positive thing. And in response, oh sure, and the state just has to create the program and move forward.
Dr. Sherman, you were invoked 30 seconds.
Yeah, I would point out the governor has had 6 years to put in this plan, to come up with some solution. This isn't something that happens overnight. This is something that builds. We knew there was a housing crunch. We've had this on the table for legislation for a while. The governor has not addressed it, and the housing crunch has become a housing crisis. He actually had this funding for almost 2 years, and only towards the end of it did he actually put in a plan. The plan was 2 pages long with no affordable housing mentioned in it. That finally, now, we have, at 5 years, the affordable housing becomes commercial housing. That's not a plan.
Tom seems to forget there was a pandemic 2 years ago. There was a pandemic. And a lot of our opportunity is spawned out of the pandemic. We managed it so well. We became the state #1 in personal freedom, strongest economy. Everybody wants to move in. And we move forward with this idea. You got to go through a legislative process. You can't just wave a magic wand and make it happen. But we did. We did actually move forward on it. And those checks are going out. Those are a reality that no governor in history has ever even tried before. And we're making it a success, a reality for all these folks.
Moving on to the next question from Gene Mackin.
We'd like to talk about abortion now, but first let's review the law in New Hampshire. As part of a budget bill in 2021, abortion was banned after 24 weeks with no exceptions for fatal fetal diagnoses or for the life of the mother. Also, as part of that bill, New Hampshire required ultrasounds for every abortion, whether medically necessary or not. In May of this year, the ultrasound provision was lifted and exceptions are now allowed for fatal fetal diagnoses and the life of the mother. Governor Sununu, you signed this ban as part of the budget, saying that you didn't think the issue warranted holding up an entire budget. You also signed changes into law about adding exceptions and removing ultrasounds. You've said you're a pro-choice governor, but on a national conservative podcast called 3 Martini Lunch, you said, quote, "I'm the first governor in 40 years to sign an abortion ban. Republican governors before me never signed that. I've done more on the pro-life issue, if you will, than anyone." So if you're a pro-choice governor, why make those comments?
Look, at the end of the day, I know all the attack ads out there. This is the one issue that Dr. Sherman always wants to talk about. Every ad of his talks about the restrictions that were put in place. As you noted, as part of the budget, we weren't going to veto the entire budget. There was no contingency resolution. If you veto a budget without that, the government shuts down in the middle of a pandemic. We obviously weren't going to do that. We said we wanted to provide more flexibilities, and we did. We provide more flexibilities on the ultrasound, providing flexibility for life of the mother. Tom and I actually agree on exceptions for rape and incest. Tom and I actually agree on making sure we don't criminalize doctors in this process. We're much more aligned on this issue than anyone would have you believe. I think our law is pretty much in line with Massachusetts and with New York. So there's no extremism here by any means. I get that this is the one issue that all the Democrats want to talk about, but think about that Dobbs case that overturned Roe v. Wade. I supported Roe v. Wade, but when Dobbs happened, nothing changed here. Other states it did. Other states you saw that extremism, but nothing changed from the day before to the day after. And again, so to pan this out as some type of extremism just isn't fair.
Dr. Sherman, you've said that it's disingenuous to talk about the need to pass laws in New Hampshire guaranteeing the right to an abortion up until birth because you say late-term abortions simply don't happen. So if a bill allowing the right to an elective abortion until birth came to your desk, would you sign it?
You know, I just have to address some of what the governor just said. A week ago during our debate, a woman named Lisa Akey was in the audience. He had an opportunity to apologize to her because his abortion ban that he signed into law put her child at risk of not being able to live because it was against the law for her to deliver that, to get the appropriate care that child might need. He said it's not about an individual. I never would have signed an abortion ban like that. I never would have signed an abortion ban. This is an intensely private discussion between a mother and her child and her doctor. Right now, in the state of New Hampshire, we are so unlike any other state. In New York or Massachusetts, we're more like Texas because in the 3rd trimester, there is no exception for the health of the mother, no exception for rape or incest. And a woman in the 3rd trimester having that awful moment, she has to sit down with her doctor and her lawyer to find out the timing so she can save the life of her baby. That's not New Hampshire.
That's time.
So, Dr. Sherman, how far would you go? How far would you allow an elective abortion to go in terms of pregnancy?
We don't have elective abortions in the state of New Hampshire. We know that from all the testimony that we heard, period. So what I would do is I would make sure that a woman has an affirmative right to an abortion in New Hampshire. We're the only state in New England that doesn't have that.
Governor, 30 seconds to respond.
No, we do have elective choice in New Hampshire.
No, we don't.
So, I think the question was how far would Dr. Sherman go? He thinks that it's okay to go to the nth degree, right? So, you know, I'll highlight something that Dr. Sherman pointed out. We don't keep track of data. Do you know we're like one of the only states in the country that doesn't keep track of the data of the abortions performed? So you don't know. I mean, I'm a data guy. I like to look at the analysis and the trends and what's happening and the give and take. But Tom Sherman in 2014 voted against the idea of collecting that information. Why wouldn't we just collect the information, right? So it's those types of political barriers that tend to come up that tend to confuse the whole issue.
It's not about politics unless you're Governor Sununu. He puts politics before people. The bottom line is that the women of New Hampshire right now are put at risk by the bill he signed into law. He had 3 weeks before signing that bill to have made sure that nothing was in there or to ask for a continuing resolution, which we did for him in 2019. He failed to do that, or he refused to do that. He announced he was going to sign an abortion ban as part of the budget 3 weeks before he signed it. Either he lacked the courage to stand up to his own party or the conviction to stand up for the women of New Hampshire.
Governor, we want to move on, but 15 seconds to respond there.
No, that's fine. Look, there's no continuing resolution. That's the legislature. Last time I checked, Tom Sherman was in the legislature. So there's no continuing resolution, which means if you veto the budget, the government shuts down. We're handing out therapeutics and vaccines and all of this.
Continuing
the government doesn't ask the legislature. The legislature provides
That's
it.
what we did in 2019. You gave us warning that you were going to veto the budget, and we gave it to you within 24 hours.
Look, if the legislature isn't going to provide it, we risk shutting down government. Tom Sherman's been very clear. He would have shut down the government in July of 21 in the middle of the pandemic over this one issue. I knew we could go down and fix it. I knew we could go make it better, which we did by providing those flexibilities, which you pointed out.
Did that for you.
Which we made sure those flexibilities. We want more flexibilities in there. So again, you don't shut down government and say it's just going to be an end-all be-all. You can always work to make things better, which is exactly what we did. That's the New Hampshire way.
Governor, you had the majority in 2021. I couldn't have stopped that. It was your legislature that could have stopped it.
Again, I push back on my party all the time. They
you
don't
didn't
always
push
listen.
back in those 3 weeks you had.
The story's out. The party doesn't always listen to me. I veto Republican bills. I veto Democrat bills.
Let's move on to the opioid crisis. Dr. Sherman, in the New Hampshire legislature, you talked about the need for more resources to help deal with the opioid crisis. But after billions of dollars in local, state, and federal spending, we're still seeing some of the highest fatality numbers on record. What specific steps will you take to reduce opioid overdoses and deaths?
There are basically 4 components to this. There's prevention, intervention or intake, treatment, and recovery. We lack in all of those, but the most important is that you have to recognize that the people who are suffering from addiction have mental illness, they have other issues, and Chris Sununu put in place the Doorways, which is a silo that puts them in one pocket and has never provided care the moment when somebody needs it. If you don't provide care when somebody needs it, they start going into withdrawal. And then they leave, and you've lost them. In the state of New Hampshire, in my district, in Seabrook, people who wanted treatment, they actually went to Manchester, not to Dover, where Chris Sununu's Doorways were, because they knew they could get immediate treatment. Those safe stations, Amber's Place, by the way, today's Amber's birthday. She was someone who died of an overdose. Those have closed because of the Doorways. So they don't have any option now for immediate treatment. And that's why we're seeing addiction rates go up and overdose rates go up.
Governor, to you, you restructured the opioid response services into what's called the hub and spoke model, calling it, quote, phenomenal. But American Medical Response, which provides emergency services in New Hampshire, says Nashua is on track this year to see its highest number of deadly overdoses since the crisis began. Manchester could see its highest number since 2017. This has been attributed to more fentanyl being incorporated into numerous different illegal drugs. You said it's time to change the messaging on this, but given how fentanyl is changing so much of this crisis, is it time to change something more fundamental about the state's response?
The Doorway works. It's awesome. It is a fundamental change that provides that rural access to care. So I have to correct your numbers. When I became governor, remember, the numbers were skyrocketing. And under Governor Hassan, the numbers were skyrocketing on overdose deaths. They were up to 490. We rebuilt the whole system, the Doorways. What happened? Went down to 415, 417, I think about 425 about a year ago. So we have gone down in overdose deaths by 15%. At the exact same time, those same 4 years, the national average has gone up 40%. Not only are we going down, but we're massively bucking a national trend that is out of control. Our model, again, is the envy of the country. They're asking how we provide those full wraparound services. We created recovery-friendly workplaces. We made sure that it wasn't just 28 days of treatment and out. We created different pathways for folks in treatment, different opportunities for recovery. We brought in other outside providers. And it wasn't just in Manchester. It was all across the state. So I'd ask you to go look at those numbers. We're down 15% over the past 4 years. The rest of the country is up 40% on overdose deaths, and that's a reality. Now, you're right, we're seeing a bump. right? We're going to go up just a little bit here because it's now a cartel-driven market. They're putting it in Adderall, they're putting it in marijuana, they're putting it in cocaine, they're putting it in meth. Folks are dying because they don't even know they're taking it, which is a whole new approach in terms of enforcement that you're right, we have to go after.
All right, moving to a lightning round. We're almost at the halfway point here, so we're going to speed things up a little bit. Answers 15 seconds each on these ones. Okay, Dr. Sherman, in your family budget, what have you cut back on to deal with inflation?
We've cut back actually on driving as much. That's been one because the price of gasoline was so high. We've also cut back on keeping lights on, making sure all the lights are off, and cutting back on our heating at night.
Governor Sununu, to you.
You know, probably mostly junk food. I got kids, and Lord knows I like ice cream. Yeah, probably just it's those extras, right? It's that kind of discretionary spend at the grocery store that a lot of folks are pulling back on. And the real fear is that other families will pull back on travel and tourism, or those extra spends they will. Yeah, it's tough.
Governor Sununu, when you're spending the day in Cheshire County, where do you like to grab lunch?
Boy, downtown in Cheshire County, probably in downtown Keene. Give me a second. I don't know. I feel bad picking one. I don't know. I mean, probably like there's a Chinese restaurant in downtown Keene that's actually pretty good. I know the owner. He's a super nice guy. So I feel like if I don't say it's going to be his place, I'll get in trouble.
Dr. Sherman?
I love the Farmers Co-op. It's got incredible selection. It's locally sourced, and it's actually a model for the future for New Hampshire as a way of keeping down inflation in New Hampshire by locally sourcing, local growing, bringing things back to New Hampshire, just like I did with the Buy America bill.
Dr. Sherman, in some cases it's taking up to 2 years to resolve cases before the Commission for Human Rights. Will you commit to the funding and manpower necessary to resolve the case backlog in the next budget, yes or no?
Yes.
Governor Sununu.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so it's taking up to 2 years to resolve cases before the Commission for Human Rights. Will you commit in the next term, if you're reelected, to providing either the funding or the manpower necessary to resolve that
absolutely.
backlog?
We've already increased. I mean, the backlog was skyrocketing. I want to say there's about 200 to 250 cases right now that are backlogged there. We provided funding and increased more staff. Problem is, it's hard to find staff. So yeah, we want to make sure the funding we've put in place is actually being used for the additional staff if we can find the people.
Governor Sununu, should the state allow a landfill to be developed in the North Country in Dalton next to Forest Lake State Park?
Yeah, well, look, you got to do it. You got to do it smart. You got to do it safe. I know it's a very controversial issue. There was a bill put forth before the Senate that effectively would have shut down expansion of any landfill in New Hampshire. So what happens? We got to transport all our trash to New York. That costs your property taxes. You got to pay for that, the extra transportation charge. No? So there's yes, the answer is yes, there's a smart and safe way to, I was an environmental engineer. I used to design these systems. There are safe ways to do it.
Dr. Sherman?
Absolutely not. I mean, the groundwater there flows too quickly. We know from hydrogeology studies that there is a risk, and I've been dealing with the Coakley landfill now since 2014. I know the risks, the dangers, and cleanup is so much more expensive. There's a state park right there. We can't endanger our state parks. We can't endanger the pristine landscape.
Last one. Dr. Sherman, if you win the $1 billion Powerball drawing, what will you buy for the state of New Hampshire?
That's a great one. You know what I would buy? I would invest in our mental health and substance use disorder treatment programming. That's where we need the help the most.
Governor Sununu, what would you buy?
You definitely don't give it to the government, right? Government has enough of your money. It's about the nonprofits. I think we have some phenomenal nonprofits across the state that do a great job already, but to invest in those that really kind of have that connection with the different programs that affect people's lives, that's where the opportunity is.
Okay, back to the bigger questions now. Moving on to Steve Bottari.
Right now, more than 3,000 students are enrolled in the Education Freedom Account program, which allows families below a certain financial threshold to get public dollars to pay for private school. Now, opponents of the program argue the public money shouldn't be going to fund grants for homeschooling or private or religious schools. Dr. Sherman, you were among the earliest critics of this program, but there's, based on the numbers, clear demand for it. Why take that choice away?
Well, there are several reasons. Number one, the oversight is very poor, but the fundamental reason, if you go up to Berlin, for example, a woman was paying $11,000 for her property tax for her home, and Berlin couldn't afford a high school chemistry teacher. My goal is that every child in the state of New Hampshire has access to a great public school education. We have a blueprint of how to do it, and the education freedom accounts or vouchers are not the way to do it. The way to do it is to actually put in place what the commission 2 years ago created. We have that blueprint. It's actually being filed as an LSR this session, and we can do that. The education freedom accounts, just so everybody's clear, that money is taken out of the Education Trust Fund, and it's going to schools that have religious or private schools. It's now $15 million over budget, and there's virtually no oversight. There's no annual means test. There's no ongoing testing to make sure that people are qualifying, and the governor has already said he wants to expand it to all children. It's a subsidy for private school.
Well, so Governor Sununu, you have said you would support eliminating the income requirement, but are you concerned that this program would then balloon beyond that and the state would be on the hook during leaner times?
Look, education freedom accounts are awesome. They are providing opportunity for families that have never been given an option before. I'm going to take a quick second. Property tax rate in Berlin, by the way, has gone down 6% since I've been governor. So
That's the rate. People don't pay rates, they pay bills, Governor.
Yeah, because the home valuations are through the roof because everybody wants to be here. So look, on the education freedom accounts, you have low and middle income families that have never been given any option in terms of where or how they want to educate their children. We have some of the best public schools in the country. I know. I went to public schools here, Tom. I lived through the public schools. They're phenomenal. The teachers are phenomenal. But at the end of the day, there's 1 or 2% of kids where the 4 traditional walls don't work. So we're sending that money back to you because it's your money as a parent. These parents have thousands of them. We thought it was going to be hundreds. Tom's right. It's overprescribed by $10 or $15 million. Luckily, we have $50 million in the Education Trust Fund. So it's not taking money away from anything. It's providing an opportunity to families that have never been given an option before. Lower income families, inner city families, that's who's taking advantage of this. It's awesome. And if there's an opportunity to expand that, to allow more families that same choice, right? Why should only affluent families have the opportunity to send their kids to private schools, right? It's about giving that equity, that equal opportunity to every family. We started it. It's been phenomenally successful beyond our wildest dreams.
We'll extend the discussion here.
Yeah, I just want to point out that 85% of the children taking advantage of that never were in public schools. I went through public schools my whole life. I believe in them 100%. I even went to public medical school. But we don't take public money, which is our money, not their money, it's our money, and we don't give it away to people who are already in private schools. That's not the way we use public money.
Yeah, it's your money. It is your money. It is not our money. It is absolutely your
all
money.
Of our money.
You are the tax. I get it. That's the way Democrats want to justify bigger government. Look, if you are for the teachers union, if you're for the system, I'm telling you, you should vote for Tom Sherman, right? He's got the backing of the teachers union, and I couldn't be more excited that they're not supporting me. When I said we're putting kids back into schools, Tom Sherman the next day was right here on WMUR saying that was a mistake. Can you imagine if Tom Sherman were governor during the pandemic at that time? Right? It's all about creating opportunity, and the most important fundamental where we disagree, kids first, parents first, families first, every single time, no exceptions.
We'll give you 15 seconds to respond, Doctor.
That's absolutely false. I care deeply about the children. I care deeply about making sure that our public schools provide excellent education anywhere in the state. And the governor's plan does not do that. In fact, he has no plan.
Then why do you want to send kids back to school when there was a huge learning gap there? I know the teachers union said there's no real learning gap. It's not a big deal.
They asked you for a week or two because there was already a transition plan, and for political reasons, you moved it up. You moved it up, and that was what you did. And so they had to. No, it's not funny, Governor. It actually put a lot of people on. Parents didn't have time to prepare, and teachers didn't have time to prepare. So, yes, it was appropriate to get them back to school. I've always felt that. But the way you did it, you went early, and that was what we opposed.
Thank God we went early. Thank God we were one of the first states to make sure that personal freedoms and opportunities
Actually, Rhode
for kids
Island was
and
before
understanding.
You. So.
And at the end of the day, it was Dr. Chan and Commissioner Shibboleth, and as a team, we said, yes, this can happen, this should happen. They can do it safely. These kids have to be back into schools, and we weren't going to accept political reasons for not doing it. We went forward, and parents around the state cheered us for doing it. Teachers around the state cheered us for doing it.
We're going to stay with the topic of education. Next question from Gene Mackin.
Well, there continues to be a national debate about student loan forgiveness, but tonight we have a question about the cost of college. This year, the cost of in-state tuition and fees for the state's flagship university, UNH, is $19,024. That's about $5,000 more than Cal Berkeley, considered the best public school in America and 13,000 more than the University of Florida. So Governor Sununu, why does UNH cost so much more than other prominent state schools? And if reelected, would you push to lower in-state tuition?
Look, across New England, our state schools, Vermont, I think is even higher than us. Across New England, state schools traditionally are a little higher in cost. We have a lot more options in terms of the mid levels. So we've increased the amount of money that we put in. I believe UNH announced today or yesterday that they're freezing the actual tuition rate for the 4th year in a row, which is a good sign. We have a phenomenal opportunity in terms of our community colleges, and again, we manage those numbers. But overall, New England as a whole always has a pretty high cost in terms of the actual public schools because there's so much opportunity with the private schools as well. And again, college isn't for everyone. It's not, right? We're trying to make sure that kids at 18 years old have all these different options. It isn't just you go to college or you don't, right? You can go to our community college, which, by the way, is one of the best community college systems in the country. Phenomenal opportunity. You can go to trade schools. You can get a job, some of the highest paying jobs right out of school right now. You can get those certificates early on. We have dual and concurrent enrollment. We have our career academies. We have all these new opportunities, all this new choice in education, which my opponent does not like, I very much like, to allow folks lots of different pathways to their success.
And Dr. Sherman, would you commit to lowering in-state tuition at UNH?
Absolutely, not just UNH, but Keene State and Plymouth State. These are schools that are doing really innovative work alongside their community college partners to build our workforce. We know that where a child ends up, or where a young adult ends up at the end of their educational career, is typically where they are going to set up shop, where they're going to build their home, build their house. That's where we want them to do it in New Hampshire. We have to make sure that we're not the governor brings up other states in New England. Other states in New England provide significantly more than we do by a long shot, because if you take ours, we're last in the country. We're last in the country, and if you double it, we're still last in the country. The governor has had 6 years. This is a critical part of our workforce development program. That's what we need to be doing. We need to be working with our community colleges, our university system, making sure that children who are young people who actually commit to New Hampshire may even have tuition waivers. That's the way we move forward with attracting people to New Hampshire, making sure they stay in New Hampshire for their jobs and set up their homes here.
Tom Sherman seems to forget that he was in the legislature, a Democrat-controlled legislature in 2019 when they gave me a budget. You guys didn't double the amount of money going to the university system. I didn't cut any money there. So again, Democrats had the opportunity. It's easy to say, and when you had the shot, you didn't do it. So let me ask you, how are you going to reduce tuition? Where's the money going to come from?
Well, first of all, in 2019, if we had passed that, you probably would have vetoed it like you did so many other bills back then. But second of all, what we need to be doing is we need to be bringing down tuition. We have the surplus. We can reinvest. And if we reinvest in our university program, like so many other states are doing, we get our children to stay here for their careers. That's how we do it.
The surplus is one-time money. Again, so Tom Sherman will solve your problem for 1 year.
No, actually, we've had a surplus running now 3 budgets in a row.
You're welcome.
And if we, I do thank Maggie Hassan, and I thank Democrats in 2019 because you vetoed it first time through.
Let's move on to our next question. Steve Buttori.
Adam, thanks. Governor, members of your party brought forward a bill earlier this year that they say would have given parents more oversight of their children at school. Critics say it could have potentially outed students who are members of the LGBT community and also compromise other students' safety. So the so-called Parental Bill of Rights was essentially dead on arrival after you promised to veto it when the Attorney General's office raised concerns the bill could have violated the state's non-discrimination law. So, Governor, is there a different version of this bill you would sign, and what provisions would it need to contain?
Look, I think what the Attorney General said was, look, we believe in the Parental Bill of Rights. We believe in that concept of making sure parents have transparency of information. And it isn't just the government say so, it's that communication. That's one of the beauties of our system, local control, working with your teacher one-on-one, parent to teacher within the system with what's best for the child. Now, the Attorney General stood up and said, this bill won't work. You know, for legal reasons, it won't work. You got to go back and redesign it. And the legislature refused to do that. So there are opportunities, I think, to bring that bill forward and fix it. The legislature chose not to do it. I went against my party. I vetoed it. I took a lot of heat for it. But there's no doubt it was the right thing to do. And if there's a way to go back and do that type of bill again, you got to always preserve the concept. I love the concept of one trusted adult. Brooklyn, a friend who has really championed this, not just here in New Hampshire, but across the country. This idea that sometimes that one trusted adult could be a coach or a teacher or whatever it is. You got to allow those discussions to happen and make sure that the health and safety of that child is absolutely preserved. But make sure that in extreme instances where the health and safety of the child may be at risk, of course you got to bring the parents in at that point and make sure there's that transparency of communication.
And Dr. Sherman, clearly some parents in the state think this is an important issue. So what will you do to ensure that parents have a say in their students' education?
Well, I think this is one of the few areas where the governor and I actually agree. We agree that there should be a strong bond between the parent, where the parents actually have a role in the interaction with the teachers and their the student, and that they actually know what's going on as much as possible. But that trusted adult may make it more at risk, and that if that trusted adult has to disclose to the parent, that could be problematic. That's what the governor is saying, and I agree that it has to be done on an individual and local basis.
Next question from Gene Mackin.
All right, thanks, Adam. Now that Vermont has legalized marijuana and the first stores are opening there, New Hampshire is the only New England state where recreational marijuana is not either legal to purchase or use. So let's start with you, Dr. Sherman. You're in favor of some type of marijuana legalization, but can you assure Granite Staters that this would not result in more traffic deaths and marijuana-related poisonings among children?
Yes, I believe it's time to move forward with adult use cannabis. The reasons are multiple. One is that, as the governor already pointed out, our street supply of marijuana is often tainted with fentanyl. So actually regulating that is a really important way of decreasing that. When somebody goes out on the street and actually buys marijuana from somebody, they are having an interaction with a dealer. They're still using it. We know that the use is still here in New Hampshire. We also know from vaping and from tobacco and from alcohol how to block marketing for children. So there's all sorts of safety measures that can be in place. We have some great models, Massachusetts, Illinois, and Vermont is actually doing a good job. That's the state that we used for therapeutic cannabis many years ago, and I was a part of bringing that to New Hampshire. We also know that in terms of the substance use crisis, we can see a reduction in the use of opioids in states that broaden this. So I am in favor of moving ahead.
And Governor, do you think New Hampshire is doing more harm than good by not legalizing cannabis so it could be more closely regulated and even taxed?
Yeah, I've always said now is not the time. Look, every state does it very differently. And one thing I wanted to do is look at what works and what doesn't. Vermont, as you referenced, has home grow, completely unregulated. Folks can grow basically whatever they want. No one's knocking on their door, checking their home grow, and kids are getting involved in it. You brought up the impaired deaths on roads, traffic impaired deaths. There's no way to test for it on the highways. And I've talked to law enforcement in other states, and they say you can pull someone over, you can suspect that they might be high on marijuana, but there's really no way to test and assure it. And so, again, it creates a lot of problems in that area. Edibles. When Colorado legalized marijuana, look at the number of calls to poison control for children in the next 3 or 4 years. They quadrupled. So kids are getting into the edibles. You guys have done stories here on MUR. They look like candy, right? And so that can get really out of control really fast. So, and finally, the black market, right? Other states have created the system and they've taxed it massively. And what happens? Well, there's always a black market that can undercut what the state is doing. You saw that, again, in California and Colorado where the black market skyrocketed. So there may be a way to do it. But again, given that we are still facing an opioid crisis, given that we still don't know what works and what doesn't in other states, it could be inevitable. I get it. But you got to be patient about how you do it and the steps that are best for New Hampshire.
Next question from Steve Butari.
In May, 2 days after an 18-year-old shot and killed 19 students and 2 teachers in Uvalde, Texas, the topic of gun control came briefly to the floor of the New Hampshire State House and was quickly dismissed. New Hampshire doesn't require any permit to purchase firearms, nor does it require any type of registration or licensing. Governor Sununu, beyond grants to schools to implement physical security measures, what promise will you make here tonight to parents and students that the state is doing everything it can to protect them from a school shooting in New Hampshire?
Yeah, look, I have kids in schools. It's scary. It really is. You see what's happening nationally. We're not immune from a school shooting, and nobody is, unfortunately. There's no single law that will guarantee that school shootings won't happen. That's very scary as parents. Now, overall, our our firearms laws here are really where they should be. I think we have a nice balance. It's where I think the general population, the folks of New Hampshire want those firearms laws to be. I get it. The Democrats want to just take guns and shut everything down, and they think that that's going to solve all the problems. I mean, in Chicago this week, 14 people shot in Chicago, 3 kids, right? No one's talking about that because it didn't happen in a school, but it's real. And they have some of the toughest firearms laws in the country. Look what's happening in some of these major cities. Massachusetts, Boston, some of these cities that just pass laws for political reasons to get a political win, to appease folks, to make them think that everything's going to be okay now. So it's really about the responsibility of the individual. It's about the responsibility of communities to take this as a whole. So there's nothing that makes any guarantees to anyone, but where our firearms laws are today are really where they should be.
Dr. Sherman, in October, former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords' gun safety organization endorsed you, saying you would fight for common solutions to gun violence. Specifically, what changes would you make then to the gun laws in the Granite State?
So we actually had 4 bills that we put in on the governor's desk in 2019. He vetoed all 4. He has recently signed into law a bill that prevents our municipal and state police from working with federal law enforcement. The things we need to do, and our number one, we're not taking people's guns. What we're doing is trying to make sure that the wrong people don't have them. When you look at every medical society, this is considered a crisis, not because of the mass shootings, but because of domestic violence and because of suicide. We know that that's a major way that people are ending their own lives. That's where the largest numbers of deaths due to gun-related deaths are. But the way we do this is we make sure our schools are safe with school zones. We make sure that there's background checks. We make sure that cross-state trafficking of illegal guns is blocked. That's how we move forward as a state to make sure that our children are safe and that our schools are safe.
I would just note that the organization you referenced, Ms. Giffords' organization that does want to take people's guns. They are looking for firearms bans all across the country, and they're getting great success with it. So that would be one of my great fears. Obviously, all the citizens, I think, would be concerned with Tom Sherman as governor.
15 seconds.
This is New Hampshire. Nobody is coming to take away the guns that people use for work, for self-defense, for recreation. That's just not going to happen. This is New Hampshire. I recognize that. But the governor has actually moved us backwards. And that's where we have to stop. My family has been exposed to 4 mass shootings. We need to stop it. I know how it feels. I know how close it can be. I know how personal it is. And we have to make sure that we take those common sense measures to protect the people of New Hampshire.
That's time. Now to a question about commitment. Governor Sununu, can you commit to the people of New Hampshire that you will serve a full 2-year term without running for any other office other than governor during that time?
Yeah, look, I get it. People wanted me to run for U.S. Senate and all that. I love New Hampshire. As a governor, this is where you get stuff done, and you got to give 110%. You know, when it comes to campaigns, previous governors would get elected, and then they start raising money right away. It drove me crazy. And as soon as you start doing that, as soon as you start campaigning, you're putting politics as a variable into your decision-making. So I wait as long as I possibly can. I don't think I ran my first fundraiser until I think March of this year or April of this year, maybe even May. Because again, when you take that variable out, you get so much more done. And then you run on those results. And that's why in New Hampshire we get so much more done. Washington's a mess. I know people are talking about that. Washington's an absolute mess. No place I want to be. I was very public about that. Here in New Hampshire, as the governor, as the CEO, if you will, you can really engage with constituents, design new systems. That's really the most exciting part of the job. So yeah, that commitment is absolutely there. I don't want to go anywhere but be governor of New Hampshire.
So it's a yes, no other office.
Oh, absolutely.
Dr. Sherman.
Well, I think that's interesting because the governor has been almost anywhere but New Hampshire over the last several months. When we look at, I am not running for any higher office. I have no political aspirations other than serving the people of New Hampshire. But when we look at where the governor, you know, when he says stuff like that, we think about, well, what does this say about his character? It's the same character that has now endorsed Don Bolduc, who he actually said was a conspiracy theorist. It's the same character that now Don Bolduc is saying, well, the next election is going to be rigged. This one, 2022. And now he's actually cutting ads for people, including a state senator who's been charged with child sexual assault. These are things that the governor is doing, and we have to make sure that that character, whether he answers this one honestly or not, we'll only know in 2 years. He is now pledging that he's not going to run for president, not going to run for vice president. Well, I would hold him to that.
Yeah, I don't know about this ad thing. I don't know what you're referencing there.
I think you do.
No, I absolutely don't, actually. But look, I got to tell you, folks across the country ask me to come, and they travel to their state. I go to California or Texas, because they want to know how we're doing it. They say you have no sales tax, you have no income tax. By the way, Tom Sherman voted for an income tax. They say you have all this local control. You put parental rights 100, 200 years before folks were really talking about it. We are the model. We're the envy of the rest of the country. And I'm so proud to travel the country, explain how our doorways work, explain what recovery-friendly workplaces are, explain all the investments in mental health that we've been able to make. That's really awesome. And I'm more than happy to share our recipe of success.
We want to get one final question in here to both of you. You both have children. What's the one thing that you worry about that could make the experience of living in New Hampshire worse for them than it is for you? 30 seconds, Dr. Sherman.
I think the way it could be worse is if we continue to follow the pathway we are on mental health and substance use. Mental health, I have children. I care very deeply about children with mental health. We still have 5 to 10 children every night sitting in our emergency rooms because the governor has not been able to fully address the mental health crisis in children. He talks about how we're doing on opioids. We're not doing well on opioids. The Doorways has been a complete disaster, and we actually have higher overdose rates right now than we ever had
That's 30
in
seconds.
New Hampshire.
Same to you, Governor.
Look, Tom is absolutely right. The issue of mental health around children is absolutely fundamental. I'm the governor that put social emotional learning into over 400 schools across the state. Didn't even exist before. We're the governor that did the mobile response teams. I bought an entire hospital just for the mental health of children, which went through just a few months ago. Now we're staffing it. We're bringing outside groups that never had an opportunity to participate, bring their expertise here in New Hampshire. When I became governor, we had about almost 100 people on a given day waiting for emergency beds. We've got that down to 0 just before the pandemic. It's up to about 25 now, and we've shortened that time. So we still have a lot of work to do, but our focus has always been on kids.
We have closing statements now. First, the governor.
Oh, sure. Well, look, this has been great. Thank you guys very much. Look, I love being governor. I do, and especially of a place like New Hampshire where we have all these successes. #1 in personal freedoms, the lowest poverty rate in the country, ranked #1 for public safety, some of the highest wages in the country, ranked #1 over in our COVID times for personal freedoms, the success that we had with COVID. So yes, we are absolutely the envy of the nation. Does it mean we don't have challenges? Of course we have challenges, and we take those head on. I'm an engineer. I like to design new systems. Mental health, we're making all these new investments, all these new opportunities for kids. Public schools, we have some of the best public schools in the country, but we're always going to challenge ourselves to provide more opportunity to families because it's their money, it's their opportunity, it's their kids, and those are the outcomes that have to come first. I couldn't be more proud to be in this state. I think all of us are. When you walk out the door, look what's happening across New England, right? Across New England, you see energy rates and inflation. It's hampering, it's crushing families, but we provide more economic opportunity here. Why is it that we're the fastest growing in population? Why is it that we have the strongest economy? Why is it that all the businesses want to be here? I want to earn votes, not on political rhetoric, but on my record, and I hope to do so.
Dr. Sherman.
I would ask, why is it that the governor is taking a victory lap while so many people are still struggling in the state of New Hampshire? I'm running for the factory in Keene that can open a 3rd shift, but can't find workforce. And when they can't find workforce, they can't find housing. I'm running for the senior who, because of Chris Sununu's policies, is facing unprecedented skyrocketing costs, whether it's property taxes, heating, energy, or rent. Yes, we're #1 in the country for rent increases. That's one of the #1s. I'm running for Lisa Akey and women like her, who Chris Sununu put at risk and continues to put at risk because of his abortion ban, because he couldn't stand up to his own party. New Hampshire deserves better. The people of New Hampshire deserve better. They deserve someone whose word counts. They deserve someone who actually knows how to solve problems in New Hampshire. And I will be that person.
Dr. Sherman, thank you. Thank you to Governor Sununu. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for watching here on our first night of the Granite State Debates. Please do join us tomorrow night when the top 2 candidates for U.S. Senate join us here. Thank you and good night.